On today's show, the Cavs continue their trip out west this week. They've got games against the Golden State Warriors, Los Angeles Lakers, and Dallas Mavericks. We'll bring in John Dickinson from KNBR to talk about the Warriors. Plus, I give thoughts on a new-look Lakers team and the Dallas Mavericks without Luka Doncic. That's all straight ahead on this whip-around edition of Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? My name is Danny Cunningham. You might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers, places like my new Substack, The Inside Shot, Cleveland Magazine, 92.3 The Fan, and a number of other stops along the way. I want to say thank you to you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. And if you're watching the show right now on YouTube, do me a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for me. Click subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content. A proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Of course, Locked On Cavs also now does have a daily newsletter, your one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at lockedondaily.com. That's lockedondaily.com and start your day with the all new free Locked On Cavs newsletter. So the Cleveland Cavaliers this week continue their West Coast road trip. I've got John Dickinson, who covers the Golden State Warriors for KNBR, coming up a little bit later on. Had some scheduling conflicts with the folks that cover the Lakers and the Mavericks, so I couldn't make interviews happen, but I do have some thoughts on those teams as we get into this week. The Lakers are a team that I expect to come out on Tuesday night and have a little bit of a refreshed energy. LeBron's 40th birthday is today, if you're watching or listening to this on Monday, but also, more importantly, the Lakers made a trade over the weekend as they shipped out D'Angelo Russell and they brought back Dorian Finney-Smith. I know that there were some other pieces and parts involved in that deal, but I do think that that's a deal that will make them better. Dorian Finney-Smith, I think, fits in pretty good with what the Lakers need in terms of a 3-and-D wing, and I think that this means that you're going to see more Austin Reeves on the ball. You're going to see more LeBron James on the ball. I think those things will ultimately be net positives for the Lakers. So this will be a Lakers team that looks a little bit different than the one that the Cavs saw when they were in town in late October. As for how Los Angeles is doing, they're 18-13 so far this season. Last 10 games, they are 6-4, They've won their last 2. This is a bit of a game, too, that I think might be a schedule loss for the Cavs. So Cleveland plays in Golden State Monday night, and then Tuesday night they play against Los Angeles in LA, obviously. And the Lakers will be coming into that game with 2 days off. So it's a pretty significant rest advantage. And when you add in the fact that, Los Angeles is probably going to be a little bit just more refreshed because of that trade, how often do you see a trade be made? And yes, there are kinks that need to be worked out, but also there's a bit of the team gets a jolt of energy because of some new blood that can be infused. And I think that the Lakers are a prime candidate for that. They haven't been a great team. I think they've been a good team. I don't think that this is a team as constructed right now, even with Dorian Finney-Smith, is a championship contending team, but this could be a tough game for the Cavs. And then Friday, the Cavs go to Dallas. I think that this is the game I was most excited to see on this trip when you just took a look at how the schedule played out. Obviously, Luka Doncic not going to be playing for Dallas, which is a huge bummer in this game. He's got that calf injury, going to miss, the next month or so, really, it sounds like. But Dallas is still a good team, even without Luka. I think Luka is the thing that makes them a championship contender. Obviously, he is, when healthy, an MVP candidate, which now he won't be this year because he's going to miss so many games. But that is something that takes this game from maybe being a measuring stick game to a game that I don't necessarily think is a measuring stick game, because it's just it's a road game against a good team, but it's not a measuring stick type of game. But they're still formidable. Kyrie Irving having a really good season. Klay Thompson, obviously the new addition to Dallas. That's a thing that we haven't seen this Mavericks team have before, is a shooter like him on the outside. The Mavericks won't have Najee Marshall. He's going to be serving, I believe, the 4th and final game of his 4-game suspension stemming from the fight that he got in the other day. So that is a game. I think that is still the biggest game to watch on this trip, but I would stop short of saying that, oh, it's a measuring stick game. And because of that, and I talked about this a little bit earlier on my first edition of Locked On Cavs for the day, I don't think that this is a road trip that necessarily the Cavs have a ton to prove on. Like, yeah, there are some games against good teams, and you want to see, how the Cavs fare in those games, of course. But if they go 2-2, and of course they already have one win in their back pocket as I sit here and talk on Monday morning, but if they go 2-2 on this trip, then okay, it's not great, it's not terrible, but if they go 4-0, it's like, okay, that was kind of expected. If they go 3-1, that was kind of expected. I don't know what's going to happen, but I also don't think that this trip is some referendum on who the Cavs are. The Cavs have already beaten a lot of good teams. They've beaten all the bad teams that they've played. This is a really great team. This West Coast trip is not going to tell us one way or another how we should feel about this Cavs team. I think the Cavs have already shown us exactly how we should feel about this team because they've been awesome. There's no reason to think that they're going to continue to be anything other than great. So without anything else from me, John Dickinson joined me. This was recorded on Sunday afternoon. Nothing has really changed, but it was recorded Sunday afternoon. I put the same shirt back on just so I looked the same, even though now I'm talking to you on Monday morning. But John was great, had a lot of really good insight into what's been going on with the Warriors since we last saw Golden State in Cleveland. If you remember, the Cavs won that game by 19 points on November 8th, had a 41-point lead at halftime. I don't expect that to happen again, but Golden State has not necessarily been the same team since then. So coming up in a minute, chat with him. Great conversation. You don't want to miss it. It's going to be a 2-segment interview. So sit tight. And here is my conversation with John Dickinson. Today's show is brought to you by Rocket RX. If you're ready to boost your confidence and take control in the bedroom, Rocket RX has the solution. Imagine feeling more prepared and performing at your best. Rocket RX makes it simple and stress-free. Rocket RX offers FDA-approved treatments for erectile dysfunction at a lower cost than branded alternatives. No more uncomfortable doctor visits or pharmacy trips. Everything is delivered straight to your door in discreet, plain packaging. With Rocket RX, you'll get trusted care from a real U.S. clinical team, complete a quick 100% online consultation, and you could get your free prescription today. Visit rocketrx.com to get started now. It only takes 2 minutes. Right now, our listeners can get 40% off your first order when you use code LOCKEDONNBA. That's rocketrx.com, code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA for 40% off your first order. Terms and conditions apply. Rocket RX, better sex made simple. Returning now to Locked On Cavs, John Dickinson. John covers the Warriors for KNBR, host of Dubs OT, anywhere you get your podcast, and on YouTube as well. John, appreciate you coming back. Glad that we didn't scare you off the first time, even though the Warriors haven't played their best basketball, I think, since you've been on this show. They started the season 12-3. Then they kind of fell off. What has changed about that team since they played in Cleveland in early November?
Yeah, 12-3, and then after the 12-3 in the first 15 games, they went 3-12 in the next 15 games to even the record at 15-15 before beating Phoenix over the weekend at home. And the Cavs back on November 8th handing the Warriors at that point, it was a showdown game. The Cavs had not lost, and the Warriors had just beaten Boston on a trip where they won in Boston and Houston without Steph Curry and Oklahoma City. So a lot of real good opponents for the Warriors on that trip, including Cleveland. Cleveland was the only loss on that trip as they stayed unbeaten. And then the Warriors came home and boosted the record all the way up to 12-3 on November 22nd. But then they lost DeAnthony Melton in the game that Klay Thompson returned to the Bay Area and played for the first time against the Warriors in his career. And they lost DeAnthony Melton on that night to what initially they didn't believe was going to be a ACL tear, but it turned out to be an ACL tear. And so DeAnthony Melton ended up out for the season, and Steve Kerr lost one of his two-way, offense, defense, positional players. And I think, the Warriors were built on depth, but I think they were also built on the fact that they pretty much knew Melton was going to be somebody, if he could stay healthy, was going to be a closing player for them, along with Steph Curry and Draymond Green and Andrew Wiggins. And then Steve was going to kind of pick the fifth based on who was playing well on a given night. So that injury really flipped the script on everything. Steve suddenly was playing Brandon Podziemski maybe more than he wanted to, and Podziemski's really struggled in his second year. Buddy Hield got off to an incredibly hot start, but really for the last month and a half has played a lot more like the Buddy Hield that saw himself shipped out of New Orleans and Sacramento and Indiana and Philadelphia. A lot more of the downs, including an 0 for 7 from three-point range in their most recent win against the Suns over the weekend. And so the defense had been there, but the offense really went to hell on the Warriors during that stretch, and a lot of blown leads and close late game losses. The tough spell started with an 18-point blown lead in San Antonio. They then came home and blew a 17-point lead against Brooklyn. Then the injuries started to pop up. Stephen Curry having to miss some time with this bilateral knee tendonitis. Draymond, as an older player, has been in and out of the lineup. They missed Andrew Wiggins for some games. So there was a lot of in and out and searching for different lineups and different rotations for Steve Kerr. And that's been instant disaster, honestly, Danny, for the Warriors the last two seasons, plus this one. Anytime things haven't quite been set or Kerr's been searching, it's just led to an offense that doesn't flow and an inability to win close games. The Warriors have played the most close games in the NBA. They got off to a 5-2 start in close games. And of that long stretch, that 15 of their last 17 games have been clutch games. And the Warriors are now 9-12 in clutch games. So they got off to a 5-2 start and we're 8-12. So you do the math on that. That's what 3-10 in 13 close games. And a lot of that was not great. A lot of that was in that 15-game stretch. So a lot has changed. Steve Kerr's been searching. And then they make the Dennis Schroeder trade, which at least in the first 5 games hadn't worked out. Schroeder 4 for his first 23 from three-point range. That was before the Suns game when he went 1 for 7, but did hit a clutch one late in the fourth quarter to give the Warriors the lead in a game they ultimately won by 4. So they're still trying to figure things out as they head toward the new year here.
So let's talk about that Dennis Schroeder trade, because that was, I would like to consider that the first big trade of the season. I know Thomas Bryant was traded to the Pacers before that, but I'm not going to count that just for the sake of this podcast. I think that the Schroeder trade was the first big one of the year. How do you think he fits in? What does his ideal world look like in Golden State playing alongside Steph Curry? Just how do you think this will work?
Yeah, they really like him, even though on the surface, they've also admitted that he isn't the most perfect fit for their offensive system. But they like his tenacity and his feistiness and his ability to muck up the game and be a pest. He really played some strong defense against Bradley Beal down the stretch in that win against the Suns. Made his impact felt, even though he wasn't having a great game where he was shooting it, but he was a minus 65 in his first 4 games with the Warriors. So when they were on the court, or when he was on the court, they were a minus 65 and he couldn't make a shot. He did not look comfortable in the offense. The Warriors had said, and Steve Kerr had made reference to the fact that they're going to have to run more pick and roll than maybe they're comfortable with. Draymond just flat out said it, as he always does. He doesn't fit, but he's good in areas that we need to be better. So we have to adjust. Like, he is a good enough player to where we have to adjust for him to make him comfortable and fit him in. And so I just think they viewed him as somebody that in the interim, while they continue to look at bigger moves to be made, Danny, he could be someone that takes the pressure off of Steph Curry late in games, because teams are really trying to take Steph Curry out, doubling him, face guarding him, just getting the ball out of his hands. And the Warriors, too often in a lot of these close games, the ball finds its way out of Curry's hands. And there's really nobody that can create their own shot or a shot for somebody else or get it back to Curry. And so, Draymond obviously can set others up, but isn't necessarily looking for his own shot in a lot of situations. So the defense really sags off and is able to play the passing lanes there. And Jonathan Kuminga is a young player who isn't always playing well enough on a given night to be a part of the closing lineup. But on the nights he's part of the closing lineup, he's very much willing to look for his own, but a lot of times it's a bad shot. And the Warriors, I think, are really at their most comfortable when Kuminga is getting his in the flow of the offense and getting it almost 100% of the time at the rim or at the free throw line. He also has struggled to make free throws compared to his first couple of years in the NBA. So they just haven't had that secondary option. I think the hope is that Schroeder, because he is so confident in his own ability in clutch moments, can create his own shot, can create a shot for others, was leading the league in mid-range at the point in which the Warriors had traded for him, but can also get all the way to the basket and was shooting a career best mark from 3-point range. So I think in the short term, they viewed him as somebody that's kind of a stopgap. Let's help out Steph Curry in the interim, be that number 2 option while the Warriors look for a more legitimate number 2 option. I don't think they think that Dennis Schroeder truly is that, but I think they're hoping that in this time between the acquisition a couple of weeks ago and the actual trade deadline on February 6th, that he could stem the tide until they figure out if they can actually get that number 2.
So you mentioned Jonathan Kuminga, and that's exactly where I wanted to go next, because from, an outsider's perspective, watching from a distance, he's somebody that at least appears to be a bit of a roller coaster type player, like where he's up and he's down and just struggling to find consistency throughout his season. But I know that he's somebody that for the Warriors to get to where they want to go to, they need better from him than they've gotten consistently. What has that experience been like for him this year? And is there hope that he'll be able to find that consistency?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, Kuminga coming into the year, I think there was so much from the outside and from the media in the Bay that he needed to step into the number 2 role next to Steph Curry, basically become the second star entering his 4th year. And the Warriors did not do a contract extension. He was extension eligible. And the reports were that he wanted, in the $170 to $200 million range for his extension. He looked at what Franz Wagner got from Orlando, and Wagner was picked the next pick after Kuminga in that 21 draft, went 8th. Kuminga went 7th. And I think while Wagner's been a better player, obviously to this point in his NBA career before his injury this year, I think Kuminga kind of looked at Wagner and says, well, I'm a better player than him, or I'm going to be a much better player than him at some point. So the Warriors were not really comfortable, and there were never really any formal offers turned down, but the Warriors number was much lower. It was more in the 110 to 120 range, low enough to where nothing ever really got serious in terms of being able to do an extension. There was also the conundrum of Kuminga viewed himself as a 3. He views himself as a small forward. The Warriors have, from the moment he's been in the league and on their team, viewed him as a power forward. And really, he's only been effective at the 4 for this team. That being said, Steve Kerr started him at the 3 to begin the year. I think there was a little bit of an appeasement and an attempt to try and mend what at times had been a frayed relationship, I think, between Steve Kerr and Jonathan Kuminga. So they started big at the beginning of the year with Andrew Wiggins at the 2, Kuminga at the 3, Draymond at the 4, Trace Jackson Davis, the young big man from Indiana, at the 5. And it lasted 3 games. And so when it lasted 3 games, that group did not play well together, even though the Warriors, because they played Portland and Utah, won 2 of those 3 games. Kerr made a switch, and he made a switch when Steph Curry had to miss the 4th game of the season against the Pelicans. You're thinking, well, wait a minute, that's going to be Jonathan Kuminga's time to shine. It turned out it was, but Steve Kerr moved him to the bench. So he would started him at the 3 with Steph Curry. Steph Curry can't play against the Pelicans. He moves him to the bench, and Kuminga has his best game of the year. And really, Kuminga's best play this year has been coming off the bench, and most impactful play to winning has been when he's come off the bench and played the 4. He came off the bench a couple of nights ago against the Clippers, even without Steph Curry, and Draymond Green had a career-high 34, then came off the bench, backed it up with Steph and Draymond playing against Phoenix, had 34 again. they still are trying to figure out the right lineup combinations with Kuminga and the right spots on the floor to get him the ball. They want things, again, in the context of the offense, at the rim, off of the Steph Curry actions when he's on the floor, obviously with Curry. When he's on the floor without Curry, and this was the case in those two games, the whole thing was basically centered around him being an isolation player and looking to get his. They did win a game against Houston with him doing that and scoring 33 in early December when Curry was out. He can get his numbers in that setting, but often it feels like the young player on the 20 to 25 win team developing when he plays at that, under those circumstances. And even that, I think, has been a bone of contention between the two sides, that Kuminga at times has almost appeared happier to be able to get his and grow and develop than to have to sort of fit his game in a box to be able to contribute cohesively to the group with Steph and Draymond on the floor. It's not that he hasn't been productive with those two, Danny, but when he has been, it's been basically with Draymond Green having to play center, and Draymond admitted following the Suns game, yeah, I don't really want to play a lot of center, and I really didn't want to play a lot of center at the beginning of the year, but I want to win. And so almost this acknowledgement. I mean, there was a point where Draymond was coming off the bench to allow Kuminga to start at the 4 for a stretch, and then the Warriors defense went to hell in a handbasket for 4 or 5 games, and Steve Kerr said, hey, I can't do this. Draymond's one of the best defenders of all time. We want our identity as a team to be defense, right, and we're not starting Draymond Green. So it just there's been a lot of that as they've tried to figure out what's going on here. I think the compromise for now, though, Danny, is Trace Jackson-Davis is back in the starting lineup. The Warriors have played at their best when he's been in the starting lineup. Draymond at the 4, Wiggins at the 3, Kuminga off the bench with Schroeder and Steph Curry in the backcourt. And they're just playing, I think, or intend to play Draymond and Kuminga a lot together as long as Kuminga's got it rolling and got the motor revved up on a night in, night out basis.
So the one thing that I picked out from that I just want to touch on quickly here is the development aspect of it, because you mentioned, coming out as a younger player, and I do kind of understand with Kuminga, it's a difficult situation to be a high draft pick on a team that has expectations rather than being a high draft pick on a team that doesn't expect to be good, and you can kind of grow on, that 25 to 35 win team. It's something similar, truthfully, to what Evan Mobley's been here in Cleveland, because since Evan has been in Cleveland, the Cavs have been good. They won 44 games his rookie year, 51 his second year. I mean, right now in his 4th year, they've got the best record in basketball. So I do wonder how much of the contention that has been there, I'm not saying that it's there presently, but it has definitely been there throughout Kuminga's tenure in Golden State, is tied to the fact that he doesn't maybe feel he can develop at the rate he needs to because the focus can't be on him.
Yeah, I think it's something that he's really grappled with, and publicly, I think he's said the right things. But if you look here at the last couple of weeks, and even just within the last week, I mean, there was a game against Indiana. They played the Lakers on Christmas, and the game against Indiana before that, everybody was basically expecting the trade request to be coming, the leak to be coming. And I feel like it's been a step away from that a couple of different times, because I mean, there will be times where, I mean, Steve Kerr, after the Minnesota game, the Warriors won in Minnesota a week ago, and it was, interestingly enough, in that 3-12 stretch, they beat Minnesota twice. Go figure. 2 of the 3 were against
their offense, not very good either. So
and Steve Kerr chose, in the aftermath of really one of their best wins in a month on the road at Minnesota, he chose the post game on that night to call out very, very pointedly Kuminga and Brandon Podziemski, neither by name, but it was mainly directed at Kuminga for the inability, taking too many mid-range shots early in the shot clock and not realizing that hey, Stephen Curry's on the roster. You got to let some plays develop and try to get the ball to him late in the games. Like, we don't need that. And that led to what many believed was going to be a breaking point with Kuminga's agent and wanting out. I mean, there have been reports go back to early January. There was a game they lost against Denver where they had an 18-point lead. Kuminga had played well, didn't play down the stretch. Jokic threw in a 30-footer at the buzzer to beat the Warriors in San Francisco. And after that game, there were multiple reports that Kuminga had lost faith in Steve Kerr. And so I think Kerr spent really the rest of 2024 trying to mend and appease that, in part because it's a young player that he needs. I also think in part because he is one of owner Joe Lacob's favorite players, and somebody that I think Joe Lacob believes, while he not that saying that he would not ever trade him, but he has an opinion of Kuminga of, I would trade him, but it's going to be for a star player only. It's not going to be for a role player. And so I think there was an appeasement to, he was going to get more opportunities. He wasn't maybe going to be spoken as harshly of in some media settings. And I think it was working really up until this game last week in Minnesota. And, Kuminga had put on his social media a couple of pictures, given the deuces, emoji with a couple of pictures on his IG. And like last weekend, everybody was kind of thinking, oh, like this thing is maybe done, and the Warriors are struggling. And obviously any kind of big move that they make, Kuminga would figure to be in the deal, even though others would have to be in a deal because he only makes $7.6 million and is a restricted free agent. So add that part to the mix. But since then, Kuminga has, had 2 career games in terms of scoring in the last 2 games. And every time that happens, Danny, in the Bay, it's never just, hey, Kuminga played well and he helped them win. It's always, is this the breakout? Is something different? Is he going to be a star now? Like there's always this extreme conversation. There are people in the fan base that would never trade him. They think he's going to be a superstar. There are others that, hey, throw him in a deal for Cam Johnson right now and bring Cam Johnson back as somebody, if the Warriors could do that really would fit well, obviously, with Steph Curry and Draymond and Andrew Wiggins. The decision the Warriors have to make between now and February 6th, real simply, is, are they going to come off of only trading him for a superstar? Because there aren't going to be a lot of superstars that are on the move, if any, truly, between now and the deadline. Maybe it's Jimmy Butler, maybe it's Zion. We'll see. But I think, would they lower the bar to where they would trade him for a Cam Johnson? That's the kind of that I think is the level that some, maybe the owner, would have to come to grips in accepting. And I don't know, nights like him scoring 34 back-to-back games kind of makes you wonder, every time, like, is the pendulum swinging again? Whereas a couple of days before that, you're thinking, hey, they would do it, or at least Steve Kerr would maybe do it in a heartbeat.
Right. I think that's a difficult discussion. It's a difficult place to have to be when the owner feels one way, and maybe the best thing for the team might not always be that, or might not be the most realistic thing. John, I will get you out of here with this. Knowing what you know now about the 2024-2025 Golden State Warriors, what do you view their ceiling as?
I mean, the team that they have right now, I think it's probably 45 games. Tops. I think that's probably play-in. I was looking at they're I think 2.5 out of the 6th spot, but they're also 2.5 out of 12th, at least before their most recent game against
it's real tight in the West.
Yeah. I don't think, as it stands right now, I guess that 45 win range could be 5th or 6th, maybe, but I think there will probably be some separation, and that number is going to get bumped up closer to probably 48 or 49 as things get going. So I think they're 45 right now, and probably a play-in team is the ceiling. I do think they need to make another move. I personally am in the camp where I would do a Jonathan Kuminga deal for someone like Cam Johnson specifically. I know they are trying to get a skilled big man if they can. Vucevic is somebody that really would appeal to them. Just, his ability to score inside and on the perimeter. I think they like the idea of bringing in a stretch big. I think Miles Turner is somebody they've always had interest in if Indiana really would be willing to move him. I think they have to make another move. I don't necessarily think it has to be a star move. I think the fixation on Jimmy Butler is real. Wiggins and Kuminga both would have to go in that deal. So along with others in terms of salary filler. But I think Cam Johnson is the kind of player that would allow some of the players, some of the other bench players that wouldn't necessarily be in that deal as salary filler to reestablish some roles. You would know Cam Johnson's a finishing player for you every single night. You're probably still in the same predicament where you've got to play smaller with Draymond and Cam Johnson and Wiggins, along with maybe Schroeder and Curry. That's a pretty small finishing group. But I think Cam Johnson's skills and shooting ability really allow a much more open, fluid offense that takes some of the heat off of Steph Curry. And if teams really try to get the ball out of his hands, there are just more options that can make other teams pay. And I think that in turn allows Steph Curry to be a bigger factor maybe in some of these close games. But the Warriors are definitely looking to make big moves between now and February 6th. And if it can't be the biggest of the moves, I think as names get scratched off the list, they just are going to keep working their way down. And I think that's why maybe you haven't seen a deal for what I would call I would call Cam Johnson a high end role player, like a starter, but not a star, but definitely a starter. And, probably better than just a role player. So a high-end role player is kind of how I categorize it.
Totally
I don't think the Warriors are maybe to that level yet. They're still looking above that level. But, I mean, take your time at your own peril, because I think there's going to be a bunch of other teams, and we saw it with the Lakers have looked to start to make some moves. Like a bunch of these other teams, I think Sacramento's going to try to make some moves. All of these teams that are in it are going to try to make moves. And I think you don't want to be left where a lot of the guys on your board end up going elsewhere, and then you are kind of stuck to where you stand pat. That's unfortunately for the Warriors where they've been for the most part here these last couple of years.
Well, if they make the right moves, maybe we'll be talking in June about Cavs Warriors Part 5. John, thanks so much for doing this. Where can everyone find you?
You can find me on social media at JD John Dickinson on Twitter and Instagram and also Blue Sky Social, all of that at KNBR, all of our socials as well. We run our Dubs OT show through YouTube and Twitch at KNBR, and also Dubs OT as far as your wherever you get your podcasts. Every show we do is podcasted, and we're on after every single Warriors game, and so looking forward to heading on into the new year, and we'll see if the Warriors can get back on track and what moves they're going to make, because I truly think, Danny, their ceiling is tied to who is not currently on their roster that they can bring in.
John, you're the best. If you're looking for more Warriors coverage, he is the guy to go to. Make sure you check him out at everywhere he just said. Again, John, thanks so much for doing this, man.
Thanks, Danny. Appreciate you, my man. And wow, Cavs are playing great.
Thank you to John Dickinson of KNBR. Again, check out what he does, Dubs OT, after every Warriors game on YouTube, everywhere you get your podcast. And thank you to you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. Like I said at the top of the show, you can find us anywhere you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure they're subscribed as well. And if you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for me. Click subscribe. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content. I'll be back later with more Locked On Cavs.